Happy Friday. Goodness gracious, what a week it has been. I am ill prepared. I am all over the place. Toothless tail up in here. We don't have Ace. But chances are you will either hear him chasing a fly in the house or barking because my partner is out and he will be coming back, which will cause Ace to bark. I am ill prepared. I personally am reading Dracula and I was hooked. So let's get into it. Today we are reading The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. We are continuing this on, and I do believe that we will be able to finish this tomorrow. So, he's chasing a fly. Hello. You haven't been here in a while. I'm glad you're back. We will get into this. I don't think you guys can hear Ace, but I can, and it's rather distracting. This is chapter 30, called Tom's Progress. And thank goodness we're finally going to figure out what's going on with Tom Canty. Whilst the true king wandered about the land poorly clad, poorly fed, cuffed and derided by tramps one while, herding with thieves and murderers in jail in another, and called idiot and impostor by all impartially, the mock king Tom Canty enjoyed quite a different experience. When we saw him last, royalty was just beginning to have a bright side for him. This bright side went on brightening more and more every day. In a very little while it was become almost all sunshine and delightfulness. He lost his fears, his misgivings faded out and died, his embarrassments departed and gave place to an easy and confident bearing. He worked the whipping boy mind to ever-increasing profit. He ordered my Lady Elizabeth and my Lady Jane Grey into his presence when he wanted to play or talk, and dismissed them when he was done with them, with the air of one familiarly accustomed to such performances. It no longer confused him to have these lofty personages kiss his hand at parting. He came to enjoy being conducted to bed in state at night and dressed with intricate and solemn ceremony in the morning. It came to be a proud pleasure to march to dinner attended by a glittering procession of officers of state and gentlemen at arms, insomuch, indeed, that he doubted his guard of gentlemen at arms and made them 100, or that he doubled his guard of gentlemen at arms and made them 100. He liked to hear the bugles sounding down the long corridors and the distant voices responding, "Way for the king!" He even learned to enjoy sitting in throne, state, and council, and seeming to be something more than the Lord Protector's mouthpiece. He liked to receive great ambassadors in their gorgeous trains, and listen to the affectionate messages they brought from illustrious monarchs who called him brother. Oh, happy Tom Canty, late of awful court! He enjoyed his splendid clothes and ordered more. He found his 400 servants too few for his proper grandeur, and trebled them. The adulation of salaaming courtiers came to be sweet music to his ears. He remained kind and gentle, and a sturdy and determined champion of all that were oppressed, and he made tireless war upon unjust laws. Yet upon occasion, being offended, he could turn upon an earl or even a duke and give him a look that would make him tremble. Once, when his royal sister, the grimly holy Lady Mary, set herself to reason with him against the wisdom of his course in pardoning so many people who would otherwise be jailed, hanged, or burned, and reminded him that their august late father's prisoners had sometimes contained as high as 60,000 convicts at one time. Their late father's prisons had sometimes contained as high as 60,000 convicts at one time, and that during his admirable reign he had delivered 72,000 thieves and robbers over to death by the executioner. The boy was filled with generous indignation, and commanded her to go to closet and beseech God to take away the stone that was in her breast and give her a human heart. Did Tom Canty ever feel troubled about the poor little rightful prince who had treated him so kindly and flown out with such hot zeal to avenge him upon the insolent sentinel of the palace gate? Yes, his first royal days and nights were pretty well sprinkled with painful thoughts about the lost prince, and with sincere longings for his return, and happy restoration to his native rights and splendors. But as time wore on and the prince did not come, Tom's mind became more and more occupied with his new and enchanting experiments, and by little and little the vanished monarch faded almost out of his thoughts, and finally, when he did intrude upon them at intervals, he was become an unwelcome spectre, for he made Tom feel guilty and ashamed. Tom's poor mother and sisters traveled the same road out of his mind. At first he pined for them, sorrowed for them, longed to see them. But later, the thought of their coming some day in their rags and dirt, and betraying him with their kisses, and pulling him down from his lofty place, and dragging him back to penury and degradation in the slums, made him shudder. At last they ceased to trouble his thoughts almost wholly, and he was content, even glad, for whenever their mournful and accusing faces did rise before him now, they made him feel more despicable than the worms that crawl. At midnight of the 19th of February, Tom Canty was sinking to sleep in his rich bed in the palace, guarded by his loyal vassals and surrounded by the pomps of royalty, a happy boy, for tomorrow was the day appointed for his solemn crowning as King of England. At that same hour, Edward, the true king, hungry and thirsty, soiled and dragged, worn with travel and clothed in rags and shreds, his share of the results of the riot, was wedged in among a crowd of people who were watching with deep interest certain hurrying gangs of workmen who streamed in and out of Westminster Abbey, busy as ants. They were making the last preparation for the royal coronation. Chapter 31. The Recognition Procession. When Tom Canty awoke the next morning, the air was heavy with a thunderous murmur. All the distances were charged with it. It was music to him, for it meant that the English world was out in its strength. The English world was out in its strength to give loyal welcome to the great day. Presently, Tom found himself once more the chief figure in a wonderful floating pageant on the Thames, for by ancient custom the recognition procession through London must start from the Tower, and he was bound thither. When he arrived there, the sides of the venerable fortress seemed suddenly rent in 1,000 places, and from every rent leaped a red tongue of flame and a white gush of smoke. A deafening explosion sounded, which drowned the shoutings of the multitude and made the ground tremble. The flame jets, the smoke, and the explosions were repeated over and over again with marvelous celerity, so that in a few moments the old tower disappeared in a vast fog of its own smoke, all but the very top of the tall pile called the White Tower. This, with its banners, stood out above the dense bank of vapor as a mountain peak projects over a cloud rack. Tom Canty, splendidly arrayed, mounted a prancing war steed whose rich trappings almost reached to the ground. His uncle, the Lord Protector Somerset, similarly mounted, took place in his rear. The king's guard formed in single ranks on either side, clad in burnished armor. After the Protector followed a seemingly interminable procession of resplendent nobles attended by their vassals. After these came the Lord Mayor of the aldermanic boy in crimson velvet robes, and with their gold chains across their breasts, and after these the officers and members of all the guilds of London in rich raiment, and bearing the showy banners of the several corporations. Also in the procession, as a special guard of honor through the city, was the ancient and honorable Artillery Company, an organization already 300 years old at that time, and the only military body in England possessing the privilege, which it still possesses in our day, of holding itself independent of the commandments of Parliament. It was a brilliant spectacle, and was hailed with acclamations all along the line as it took its stately way through the packed multitudes of citizens. The chronicler says, "The king, as he entered the city, was received by the people with prayers, welcomings, cries, and tender words, and all signs which argue an earnest level of subjects towards their sovereign. And the king, by holding up his glad countenance to such as stood afar off, and most tender language to those that stood nigh his grace, showed himself no less thankful to receive the people's goodwill than they to offer it. To all that wished him well he gave thanks. To such as bade, God save his grace, he said in return, God save you all, and added that he thanked them with all his heart. Wonderfully transported were the people with the loving answers and gestures of their king. In Fenchurch Street, a fair child in costly apparel stood on a stage to welcome his majesty to the city. The last verse of his greeting was in these words: "Welcome, O king, as much as hearts can think. Welcome again, as much as tongues can tell. Welcome to joyous tongues and hearts that will not shrink. God preserve thee, we pray, and wish thee ever well." The people burst forth in a glad shout, repeating with one voice what the child had said. Tom Canty gazed about over the surging sea of eager faces, and his heart swelled with exultation, and he felt that the one thing worth living for in this world was to be king and a nation's idol. Presently he caught sight at a distance of a couple of his ragged Offal Court comrades, one of them the Lord High Admiral in his late mimic court, and the other the first Lord of the Bedchamber in the same pretentious fashion, and his pride swelled higher than ever. Oh, if only they could recognize him now! What unspeakable glory it would be if they could recognize him and realize that the derided mock king of the slums and back alleys was become a real king, with illustrious dukes and princes for his humble menials and the English world at his feet. But he had to deny himself and choke down his desire, for such a recognition might cost him more than it would come to. So he turned away his head and left the two soiled lads to go on with their shoutings and glad adulations, unsuspicious of whom it was that they were lavishing them upon. Every now and then rose the cry, "A large ass, a large ass," and Tom responded by scattering a handful of bright new coins abroad for the multitude to scramble for. The chronicler says, "At the upper end of Gracechurch Street, before the sign of the Eagle, the city had erected a gorgeous arch, beneath which was a stage which stretched from one side of the street to the other. This was an historical pageant representing the king's immediate progenitors. There sat Elizabeth of York in the midst of an immense white rose, whose petals formed elaborate furbelows around her. By her side was Henry the Seventh, 567, yeah, issuing out of a vast rose, disposed in the same manner. The hands of the royal pair were locked together, and the wedding ring ostentatiously displayed. From the red and white roses proceeded a stem which reached up to a second stage occupied by Henry the Eighth, issuing from a red and white rose with the effigy of the new king's mother, Jane Seymour, represented by his side. One branch sprang from this pair, which mounted to a third stage, where sat the effigy of Edward VI himself, enthroned in royal majesty, and the whole pageant was framed with wreaths of roses, red and white. Happy Fourth. I am not American. This quaint and gaudy spectacle so wrought upon the rejoicing people that their acclamations utterly smothered the small voice of the child, whose business it was to explain the thing in eulogistic rhymes. But Tom Canty was not sorry, for this loyal uproar was sweeter music to him than any poetry, no matter what its quality might be. Whithersoever Tom turned his happy young face, the people recognized the exactness of his effigy's likeness to himself, the flesh and blood counterpart, and new whirlwinds of applause burst forth. The great pageant moved on, and still on, under one triumphal arch after another, and past a bewildering succession of spectacular and symbolical tableaux, each of which typified and exalted some virtue or talent or merit of the little kings. Throughout the whole of Cheapside, from every penthouse and window, hung banners and streamers, and the richest carpets, stuffs, and cloth of gold tapestried the streets, specimens of the great wealth of the stores within, and the splendor of this thoroughfare was equalled in the other streets, and in some even surpassed. And all these wonders and these marvels are to welcome me. Me, murmured Tom Canty. The mock king's cheeks were flushed with excitement, his eyes were flashing, and his senses swam in a delirium of pleasure. At this point, just as he was raising his hand to fling another rich largesse, he caught sight of a pale, astounded face, which was strained forward out of the second rank of the crowd, its intense eyes riveted upon him. A sickening consternation struck through him. He recognized his mother, and up flew his hand, palm outward, before his eyes, that old involuntary gesture, born of a forgotten episode and perpetuated by habit. In an instant more she had torn her way out of the press, and past the guards, and was at his side. She embraced his leg, she covered it with kisses, and cried, "Oh, my child, my darling!" lifting toward him a face that was transfigured with joy and love. The same instant an officer of the King's Guard snatched her away with a curse, and sent her reeling back whence she came with the vigorous impulse of a strong arm. The words, "I do not know you, woman," were falling from Tom Canty's lips when this piteous thing occurred, but it smote him to the heart to see her treated so, and as she turned for a last glimpse of him, whilst the crowd was swallowing her from his sight, she seemed so wounded, so broken-hearted, that a shame fell upon him which consumed his pride to ashes, and withered his stolen royalty. His grandeurs were stricken valueless. They seemed to fall away from him like rotten rags. The procession moved on, and still on, though ever-augmenting splendors and ever-augmenting tempests of welcome, but to Tom Canty they were as if they had not been. He neither saw nor heard. Royalty had lost its grace and sweetness. Its pomps were becoming a reproach. Remorse was eating his heart out. He said, "Would God I were free of my captivity." He had unconsciously dropped back into phraseology of the first days of his compulsory greatness. The shining pageant still went winding like a radiant and interminable serpent down the crooked lanes of the quaint old city and through the huzzahing hosts, but still the king rode with bowed head and vacant eyes, seeing only his mother's face and that wounded look in it. "Largesse, largesse!" the cry fell upon an unheeding ear. "Long live Edward, King of England!" It seemed as if the earth shook with the explosions, but there was no response from the king. He heard it only as one hears the thunder of the surf when it is blown to the ear out of a great distance, for it was smothered under another sound which was still nearer, in his own breast, in his accusing conscience, a voice which kept repeating those shameful words, "I do not know you, woman." The words smote upon the king's soul as the strokes of a funeral bell smite upon the soul of a surviving friend when they remind him of secret treachery suffered at his hand by him that is gone. I don't have Discord. New glories were unfolded at every turning, new wonders, new marvels sprang into view. The pent clamors of waiting batteries were released. New raptures poured from the throats of the waiting multitudes, but the king gave no sign, and the accusing voice that went moaning through his comfortless breast was all the sound that he heard. By and by the gladness in the faces of the populace changed a little and became touched with a something like solicitude or anxiety. An abatement in the volume of the applause was observable too. The Lord Protector was quick to notice these things. He was as quick to detect the cause. He spurred to the king's side, bent low in his saddle, uncovered, and said, "My liege, It is an ill time for dreaming. The people observe thy downcast head, thy clouded mind, and they take it for an omen. Be advised, unveil the sun of royalty, and let it shine upon these boding vapors and disperse them. Lift up thy face and smile upon thy people. So saying, the duke scattered a handful of coins to the right and left, then retired to his place. The mock king did mechanically as he had been bidden. His smile had no heart in it, but few eyes were near enough or sharp enough to detect that. The noddings of his plumed head as he saluted his subjects were full of grace and graciousness. The largesse which he delivered from his hand was royally liberal. So the people's anxiety vanished, and the acclamations burst forth again in as mighty a volume as before. Still once more, a little before the progress was ended, the Duke was obliged to ride forward and make remonstrance. My goodness, clearly it is Friday, because I am struggling over every single word here. Still once more, a little before the progress was ended, the Duke was obliged to ride forward and make remonstrance. He whispered, O dread sovereign, shake off these fatal humours. The eyes of the world are upon thee. Then he added with sharp annoyance, Perdition catch thy crazy pauper. 'Twas she that hath disturbed your highness. The gorgeous figure turned a lustreless eye upon the Duke and said in a dead voice, She was my mother. My God, groaned the protector as he reined his horse backwards to his post. The omen was pregnant with prophecy. He has gone mad again. Good morning. I'm glad you're here. Chapter 32, Coronation Day. Let us go backward a few hours and place ourselves in Westminster Abbey at 4 o'clock in the morning of this memorable Coronation Day. We are not without company, for, although it is still night, we find the torch-lighted galleys already filling up with people who are well content to sit still and wait 7 or 8 hours till the time shall come for them to see what they may not hope to see twice in their lives, the coronation of a king. Yes, London and Westminster have been astir ever since the warning gusts boomed at 3 o'clock. AC, you're okay. Okay, he's fine. Yes, London and Westminster have been astir ever since the warning gusts boomed at 3 o'clock, and already crowds of untitled rich folk who have bought the privilege of trying to find sitting room in the galleries are flocking in at the entrances reserved for their sort. The hours drag along tediously enough. All stir has ceased for some time, and every gallery has long ago been packed. We may sit now and look and think at our leisure. We have glimpses here and there and yonder through the dim cathedral light of portions in galleries and balconies wedged full with other people, the other portions of these galleries and balconies being cut off from sight by intervening pillars and architectural projections. We have in view the whole of the great north transept, empty and waiting for England's privileged ones. We see also the ample area or platform carpeted with rich stuffs, whereon the throne stands. The throne occupies the center of the platform and is raised above it upon an elevation of 4 steps. Within the seat of the throne is enclosed a rough, flat rock, the stone of scones, the stone of scone, which many generations of Scottish kings sat on to be crowned, and so in it time became holy enough to answer like a purpose for English monarchs. Both the throne and its footstool are covered with cloth of gold. Stillness reigns, the torches blink dully, the time drags heavily. But at last the lagging daylight asserts itself, the torches are extinguished, and a mellow radiance suffuses the great spaces. All features of the noble building are distinct now, but soft and dreamy, for the sun is lightly veiled with clouds. At 7 o'clock, the first break in the drowsy monotony occurs, for on the stroke of this hour, the first peerers enters the transept, clothed like Solomon for splendor, and is conducted to her appointed place by an official clad in satins and velvets, whilst a duplicate of him gathers up the lady's long train, follows after, and, when the lady is seated, arranges the train across her lap for her. Then he places her footstool according to her desire, after which he puts her coronet where it will be convenient to her hand when the time for its simultaneous coroneting of the nobles shall arrive. By this time, the peeresses are flowing in a glittering stream, and the satin-clad officials are flitting and glinting everywhere, seating them and making them comfortable. The scene is animated enough now. There is stir and life and shifting color everywhere. After a time, quiet reigns again, for such peeresses are all come and are all in their places, a solid acre or such a matter of human flowers, resplendent in variegated colors, and frosted like a Milky Way with diamonds. There are all ages here, brown, wrinkled, white-haired dowagers who are able to go back and still back down the stream of time and recall the crowning of Richard III and the troubled days of that forgotten old age. And there are some handsome middle-aged dames and lovely and gracious young matrons and gentle and beautiful young girls with beaming eyes and fresh complexions who may possibly put on their jeweled coronets awkwardly when the great time comes, for the matter will be new to them and their experiment will be a sore hindrance. Still, this may not happen, for the hair of all these ladies has been arranged with a special view to the swift and successful lodging of the crown in its place with the signal when the signal comes. We have seen that this massed array of peeresses is sewn thick with diamonds, and we also see that it is a marvelous spectacle. But now we are about to be astonished in earnest. About 9, the clouds suddenly break away and a shaft of sunshine cleaves the mellow atmosphere and drifts slowly along the ranks of ladies. And every rank it touches flames into a dazzling splendor of many-colored fires, and we tingle to our fingertips with the electric thrill that is shot through us by the surprise and the beauty of the spectacle. Presently, a special envoy from some distant corner of the Orient, marching with a general body of foreign ambassadors, crosses this bar of sunshine, and we catch our breath. The glory that streams and flashes and palpitates about him is so overpowering, for he is crusted from head to heel with gems, and his slightest movement showers a dancing radiance all around him. Let us change the tense for convenience. The time drifted along, 1 hour, 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, and the deep booming of artillery told that the king and his grand procession had arrived at last. So the waiting multitude rejoiced. All knew that a further delay must follow, for the king must be prepared and robed for the solemn ceremony. But this delay would be pleasantly occupied by the assembling of the peers of the realm in their stately robes. These were conducted ceremoniously to their seats, and their coronets placed conveniently at hand. And meanwhile the multitude in the galleries were alive with interest, for most of them were beholding for the first time dukes, earls, and barons whose names had been historical for 500 years. When all were finally seated, the spectacle from the galleries and all coigns of vantage was complete, a gorgeous one to look upon and to remember. Now the robed and mitred great heads of the church, and their attendants filed in upon the platform and took their appointed places. These were followed by the Lord Protector and other great officials, and these again by the steel-clad detachment of the guard. There was a waiting pause. Then, at a signal, a triumphant peal of music burst forth, and Tom Canty, clothed in a long robe of cloth of gold, appeared at the door and stepped upon the platform. The entire multitude rose, and the ceremony of their recognition ensued. Then a noble anthem swept the abbey with its rich waves of sound, and thus heralded and welcomed, Tom Canty was conducted to the throne. The ancient ceremonies went on with impressive solemnity, whilst the audience gazed, and as they drew nearer and nearer to completion, Tom Canty grew pale and still paler, and a deep and steady deepening woe and despondency settled down upon his spirits and upon his remorseful heart. At last, the final act was at hand. The Archbishop of Canterbury lifted up the crown of England from its cushion and held it out over the trembling mock king's head. In the same instant, a rainbow radiance flashed along the spacious transept. For with one impulse, every individual in the great concourse of nobles lifted a coronet and poised it over his or her head, and paused in that attitude. A deep hush pervaded the abbey. At this impressive moment, a startling apparition intruded upon the scene, an apparition observed by none in the absorbed multitude, until it suddenly appeared, moving up the great central aisle. It was a boy, bareheaded, ill-shod, and clothed in coarse plebeian garments that were falling to rags. He raised his hand with a solemnity which ill comported with his soiled and sorry aspect, and delivered this note of warning. "I forbid you to set the crown of England upon that forfeited head. I am the king." In an instant, several indignant hands were laid upon the boy, but in the same instant, Tom Canty, in his regal vestments, made a swift step forward and cried out in a ringing voice, "Loose him and forbear! He is the king!" A sort of panic and astonishment swept the assemblage, and they partly rose in their places and stared in a bewildered way at one another and at their chief figures in the scene, like persons who wondered whether they were awake in their senses or asleep and dreaming. The Lord Protector was as amazed as the rest, but quickly recovered himself, and exclaimed in a voice of authority, "Mind not his majesty, his malady is upon him again. Seize the vagabond." He would have been obeyed, but the mock king stamped his foot and cried out, "On your peril! Touch him not! He is the king!" The hands were withheld. A paralysis fell upon the house. No one moved, no one spoke. Indeed, no one knew how to act or what to say in so strange and surprising an emergency. While all minds were struggling to right themselves, the boy still moved steadily forward, with high port and confident mien. He had never halted from the beginning, and while the tangled minds still floundered helplessly, he stepped upon the platform, and the mock king ran with a glad face to meet him, and fell upon his knees before him, and said, O my lord the king, let poor Tom Canty be the first to swear fealty to thee, and say, put on thy crown and enter into thine own again. The Lord Protector's eye fell sternly upon the newcomer's face, but straightway the sternness vanished away and gave place to an expression of wondering surprise. This thing happened also to the other great officers. They glanced at each other and retreated a step by a common and unconscious impulse. The thought in each mind was the same. What a strange resemblance. The Lord Protector reflected a moment or two in perplexity. Then he said, with grave respectfulness, by your favour, sir, I desire to ask certain questions which... I will answer them, my lord. The Duke asked him many questions about the court, the late king, the prince, the princesses. The boy answered them correctly and without hesitating. He described the rooms of the state in the palace, and the king's late apartments, and of those of the Prince of Wales. It was strange. It was wonderful. Yes, it was unaccountable, so all said that heard it. The tide was beginning to turn, and Tom Canty's hopes to run high, when the Lord Protector shook his head and said, It is true, it is most wonderful, but it is no more than our Lord the King likewise can do. This remark, and the reference to himself as still the king, saddened Tom Canty, and he felt his hopes crumbling from under him. These are not proofs, added the Protector. The tide was turning very fast now, very fast indeed, but in the wrong direction. It was leaving poor Tom Canty stranded on the throne and sweeping the other out at sea. The Lord Protector communed with himself, shook his head, and the thought forced itself upon him. It is perilous to the state and to us all to entertain so fateful a riddle as this. It could divide the nation and undermine the throne. He turned and said, Sir Thomas, arrest this. No, hold. His face lightened, and he confronted the ragged candidate with this question. Where lieth the great seal? Answer me this truly, and the riddle is unriddled, for only he that was the Prince of Wales can so answer. On so trivial a thing hang a throne and a dynasty. Oh, my back is so sore. It was a lucky thought, a happy thought. That is what's so considered by the great officials was manifested by the silent applause that shot from eye to eye around their circle in the form of bright approving glances. Yes, none but the true prince could dissolve the stubborn mystery of the vanished great seal. This forlorn little impostor had been taught his lesson well, but here his teachings must fail, for his teacher himself could not answer that question. Ah, very good indeed. Now we shall be rid of this troublesome and perilous business in short order. And so they nodded invisibly and smiled inwardly with satisfaction and looked to see this foolish lad stricken with a palsy of guilty confusion. How surprised they were then to see nothing of the sort happen. How they marveled to hear him answer so promptly, in a confident and untroubled voice, and say, There is naught in this riddle that is difficult. Then, without so much as a by your leave to anybody, he turned and gave this command with the easy manner of one accustomed to doing such things. My lord St. John, go you to my private cabinet in the palace, for none knoweth the place better than you, and, close down to the floor, in the left corner remotest from the door that opens from the antechamber, you shall find on the wall a brazen nail head. Press upon it, and a little jewel closet will fly open, which not even you do know of. No, nor any else soul in all the world but me and the trusty artisan that did contrive it for me. The first thing that falleth under your eye will be the great seal. Fetch it hither. All the company wondered at his speech, and wondered still more to see the little mendicant pick out this peer without hesitancy or apparent fear of mistake, and call him by name with such a placidly convincing air of having known him all his life. The peer was almost surprised into obeying. He even made a movement as if to go, but quickly recovered his tranquil attitude and confessed his blunder with a blush. Tom Canty turned upon him and said sharply, Why dost thou hesitate? Hast not heard the king's command? Go. The Lord St. John made a deep obeisance, and it was observed that it was a significantly cautious and non-committal one, it not being delivered at either of the kings, but at the neutral ground about halfway between the two, and took his leave. Now began a movement of the gorgeous particles of that official group which was slow, scarcely perceptible, and yet steady and persistent. A movement such as is observed in a kaleidoscope that is turned slowly, whereby the components of one's blended cluster fall away and join themselves to another. A movement which, little by little, in the present case, dissolved the glittering crowd that stood about Tom Canty and clustered it together again in the neighborhood of the newcomer. Tom Canty stood almost alone. Now ensued a brief season of the deep suspense and waiting, during which even a few faint hearts still remaining near Tom Canty gradually scraped together courage enough to glide, one by one, over to the majority. So at last Tom Canty, in his royal robes and jewels, stood wholly alone and isolated from the world, a conspicuous figure, occupying an eloquent vacancy. I actually think that that's where I want to end off, because then that'll give us probably about a half an hour tomorrow as well. I think we know where it's going. I'm sure we know where it's going, but I'm interested to see what happens to Tom Canty. So that is all for today. I will upload this on YouTube. I'm not editing it, blunders and all. Sorry, it's Friday. I'm just a girl. I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you so much for reading with me. Bye.